410 AD is the year most often given as the end of Roman Britain. Zosimus, a 5th century chronicler, had told us that in the summer of that year, Honorius wrote to the cities of Britannia, saying that they were to govern themselves. Increasingly, historians are cynical of Zosimus, believing that Honorius wrote instead to the cities within Rhaetia, around modern Switzerland. Nevertheless, the date that Zosimus's account gives us has been subsumed into the narrative of the end of Roman Britain. It's a convenient shelf mark for the end of the Roman period and for the beginning of the next. Roman Britain was increasingly threatened in the late 4th and early 5th centuries. Picts and Scots were constantly attacking Bretons, Saxons were being invited to deflect these invasions and were probably also raiding themselves. Rome, having its own issues to deal with, eventually stopped responding to Britain's pleas for help. This is because Britain was a minor part of the empire. It had very few resources that could not be obtained elsewhere. It was distant and it was expensive to maintain. It comprised 5% of the empire's surface area, but it required 12% of its military expenditure to keep. Strategically, its only use was the removal of the threat of invasion, but clearly this was poorly executed. Britain's only use was as land to reward the generals. For that reason, Britain can be said to have been obtained by Romans in a fit of absence of mind. After Roman Britain collapsed, the evidence is incredibly sparse. The number of reliable sources which even mention the location and period can be counted on one hand. Not only are these events integral to Anglo-Saxon, Welsh and Cornish, Scottish and Irish identities, but they are also important in Africa, Australia, New Zealand and America. But still, we are uncertain what happened in 5th century Britain. Gildas, in the 6th century, tells us that the Romans could not spare the manpower to repel Britain's invaders. Even if they could, he believes that Bretons should have protected themselves. But they didn't. Because they didn't, they were lazy. So God had sent the pagan Saxons as the ultimate insult for their lethargy. The narrative which Gildas gives us is that Roman Britain was lost, not only to the Romans, but to the Bretons as well. Anglo-Saxons came and took Britain from the undeserving Bretons. It is tempting to reduce the narrative down to this level, that Anglo-Saxons, through cultural superiority, managed to destroy the last of the Romans, suppress the Bretons and take the island for themselves. This is the narrative that was weaved in the 8th century to justify the Anglo-Saxons' place in Britain, just as it was used in the 19th century to justify English conquest of everywhere else. The real image is far more nuanced than Gildas tells us. Far from Rome abandoning the Bretons, it was the Bretons that abandoned Rome. Far from Anglo-Saxons conquering the Bretons, they worked alongside them. These landowners would have, originally at least, considered themselves Roman. When a Roman soldier had served for 25 years, they were rewarded with Roman citizenship and all of the legal, fiscal and social advantages which that gave, one of which was a tract of land, and another of which was a sizable pension. They would pay taxes on income and inheritance, which would fund feeding and maintaining the Roman military and state, which would aid the landholder when needed, and would settle their land disputes civilly within Roman law. These powerful landowners would be given land where it was available. The greatest, and sometimes only, investment was more land. In buying land or other goods, they paid purchase tax to Rome. They also paid taxation on the produce of their land. Not only was Rome dependent upon the landowners to fund its military, the landowners were dependent on Rome. Should they need it, landowners could call upon Rome to protect their land. If they were not protected, then there were less benefits to being in the Roman Empire, which meant there were no perceivable advantages to pay Roman taxes. Why pay taxes to Rome if Rome can't even protect you from recurring threats of raiders? Not only was Rome not coming to their aid, but troops were taken away from Britain to defend a different front. Supposedly, in the early 5th century, the Roman administration was expelled from Britain, and with them went Roman law. Powerful landowners were now the final authority within Britain, positioning themselves as the law of the land, hiring Saxon mercenaries to fulfill the job that they wanted the Roman army to do. There is no explicit evidence that the Roman administration was evicted in one singular event, but by the mid-5th century, the Brittonic landowners certainly governed themselves. This is shown in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which details that in 449, the British king Vortigern had invited Saxons from Saxony to protect his kingdom. Hengist and Horsa, two Saxon warlords, came, landing at Ebbsfleet in the Isle of Thanet, and aided in defending Vortigern's kingdom. The sources state that Hengist and Horsa invited over more and more of their brethren, and they came to aid in defending Vortigern from invaders. We can't accept these events from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle at face value, but that this was written tells us that something similar probably happened in the mid-5th century. Modern narratives centre around a pseudo-historical event named the Treachery of the Long Knives, which tell us that Hengist and Horsa used Vortigern's lust for Hengist's daughter to invite over more Saxons, which would secure for Hengist what was to become the Kingdom of Kent. During a feast celebrating cooperation between Bretons and Anglo-Saxons, the Saxons slaughtered the Bretons, and though Vortigern survived, his entourage was killed and his land was divided among the attending Saxons. Many aspects of this event, including the event itself, are almost certainly fictional. It places blame onto singular individuals, inflating their importance and implying that they are part of a narrative. This shows us how Anglo-Saxons and Bretons would wish to portray the 5th century. The Anglo-Saxons, seeking a warrior to praise, could praise the strength of Hengist and Horsa for their conquering. The Bretons, wishing to blame an individual, could blame the weak and lustful King Vortigern for losing their island with his idiocy. Far from being king of a united Britain, Vortigern was probably a 5th century landlord based around modern Kent, who had hired Saxons, who may have been led by Hengist, to protect his land from raiders. Through disagreement or maybe backstabbing, Hengist had fought against Vortigern. In 456, a battle is known to have been fought at Aylesford between the two parties, and though we don't know who had won this battle, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle reports that Hengist was made King of Kent, followed by his son Eoch. The outcome of the battle is uncertain, but the war was clearly a Saxon victory. Hengist's victory was one of many throughout a divided British Isles, but within Kent, he was an important enough figure that every king of Kent afterwards traced their lineage back to him. The interaction between Hengist and Vortigern was localised to southwest Britain, but it has been ingrained into the united Anglo-Saxon identity since the 8th century, when aspects of Germanic, Brittonic and Roman culture had created Anglo-Saxon culture, which was inseparable from aspects of all three. Ethelbald here is shown with his shirt and sword, which are similar to those found elsewhere in the Germanic world, but this carving also shows him with a Celtic moustache and with a Roman haircut and military skirt. Anglo-Saxon kings were influenced by Brittonic and Roman ideas as much as Germanic ones. To Ethelbald, this was simply a kingly appearance. The Roman coinage and skirt, the Brittonic facial hair, and Germanic house and sword were all equated with Anglo-Saxon concepts of kingship. Individuals who had not embraced this Anglo-Saxon culture were demonised. Bretons were perceived, and likewise wished to be perceived, as different. The word Welsh comes from the Old English word Wilish, meaning foreign or non-Germanic. This title is today given to the Welsh and to their homeland, Wales. Thanks for watching. On the left there's another video about this topic, and on the right there's a video about Vikings, who they were and why they raided, pillaged and settled. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe and ring the bell and all those other things that you probably won't do.